is a couple of things that have started to happen across the country. Let me give Nova Scotia as an example. 2 years ago, under a red Tory, progressive conservative government in Nova Scotia, they took the adult learning and the skills and learning sections out of the Department of Education and put them into a newly named and reorganized Department of Labor and Workforce Development. Something similar has been happening in a number of jurisdictions. Adult learning and skills and learning were, in the Department of Education, marginalized. In the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, they are central. That has been happening increasingly. Under the new the new conservative progressive government, we don't want to swing too much one way or the other. In Nova Scotia, they have as an election platform and as one of their top priorities, making Nova Scotia a learning province. And they don't mean more universities, and they don't mean more community college. They mean learning broadly defined. Broadly defined in a way that Paul Capon brilliantly talks about, embracing a culture of learning that goes beyond formal education to include all forms of structured and unstructured learning in the community, in the workplace, and in the home. Out of the comments yesterday, I'm delighted there's some people here from the community sector, the community learning sector, but in some of the literature of the network, the emphasis seems to have been on leaders from education, government, and employers. This is a point at which I would like to say you have got to include the community voluntary sector in a major, major way. When we were set up in the mid-90s, if we had to rely on those universities to support us, we would have lasted about 3 years. We had, by the grace of God, the Minister of Education, who had backed Mary Morrissey in setting up the PLA Centre, had become the Minister of Community Services. And he said to his director, go over and talk to Doug at the PLA Centre. I think they've got some stuff that would interest you. And our most steadfast champion in Nova Scotia from then till now has been the Department of Community Services, who saw this approach to learning as helping their clients, social assistance recipients, employment assistance service agencies, as a way to move them forward. Sometimes, yes, into formal education and training, but often into employment or into greater community participation or into greater independence. And that has been absolutely fundamental to my shift in the head of how I think about learning in today's society. So where we've got to in Nova Scotia, just as an example of what is perhaps in your future, at the end of March we had a 2-day session much like today that was sponsored by the Canadian Council on Learning and the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, that was entirely government people from 13 agencies and departments, and the focus was on not should we move ahead with this learning province agenda, but how are we going to do it? I think something like that is a possible next step, and I was amazed at the willingness of those bureaucrats to talk to each other across the silos, to say we actually know how to do this. And we had some resource people there saying this is the right direction. People across Canada, jurisdictions across Canada and internationally are moving in this direction because that's where the pressure is. The session was introduced by Rick Williams as Deputy Minister of Priorities and Planning. And he said our two major challenges are inclusion in the workforce in Nova Scotia, and it'll be a little bit different here, but these are our economic development issues, inclusion in the workforce of those presently included, and increasing the productivity of the existing workforce. And he said both of these are essentially learning challenges. And I think they are. They're economic and development challenges, but this is about our human resource. So what this adds up to, I think, is what Mary describes as an opportunity for social innovation, of shifting the lens, of shifting the context. You well know the basic principles of PLAR. What an individual knows and can do is more important than how he or she learned it. And secondly, that no one should have to learn over again what they already know and can do. I think the Canadian Council on Learning has been a wonderful learner. They are a wonderful example. They have moved the yardsticks, even though the Conservative federal government has offed them. They've set some standards there, and the life-wide learning as well as lifelong learning, captured by their 4 pillars of learning, is, I think, absolutely essential to our reframing. I just want to note, and I'll maybe have a chance to mention this later today, harmonization and tuning are some things that are happening in Europe in disciplines of figuring out how to harmonize and tune fields of study and programs in a much more effective way than before. And finally, I think it's finally, you hope it's finally, let me see if there's anything I have desperately want to say. One further thing. What's happened in Nova Scotia has also happened amazingly across the country. We constitutionally have great difficulty getting anywhere on a pan-Canadian basis in education for constitutional reasons. That's a reality of our life. On trade, investment and labor mobility, however, we have a much more open system. And while it takes years for the Council of Ministers of Education to move an inch, the progress over the last 2 years on TILMA has been astonishing, and labor mobility is all about learning and the recognition of learning. When Alberta and BC framed that agreement, I thought, well, here goes. We'll do it the Canadian way. Bilateral, Quebec, Ontario, blah, blah. In about 100 years, we'll have a pan-Canadian. Within a year and a half, we now have a pan-Canadian agreement. Now, there's all kinds of difficulties with it, and there'll be all kinds of roadblocks, but we've got that because Canada wants to trade with Europe,